Welcome to Old Time Yarns, where stories are told the way they used to be. Step back to a simpler time. Sit a spell. Hear a story. I reckon it's been near on 50 years since that summer, but I can still smell it plain as yesterday. Sun-warmed hay, creek mud on bare feet, and wood smoke that like to hang around the ridge long after supper. Folks say memory fades, but mine never quite learned how. Back then, Briar Hollow burnt much more than a handful of roofs and a notion. We had the mill down by Carter's Ford, Boone's Forge up the hill, and a scatter of cabins stitched between. The roads weren't really roads, just two wagon ruts that turned to soup come rain. But it was home, and home's a fine thing when you're too young to know what else the world's got. I was 18 that spring, skinny as fence wire, strong enough to fool myself otherwise. My days started when the rooster lied about dawn and ended when the whippoorwill told the truth about dark. We grew corn and beans on land my daddy never owned, but always treated like it bore our name. The plow handles had worn smooth from his hands, and when he passed, mine fit right where his had been. Work was the language we spoke most fluent. If you wanted to talk about love or dreams, you hid it in the sound of a hoe striking dirt. Mama kept house like the world might come inspect it any minute. Floors swept twice, quilts beat clean every Saturday, biscuits cut with the same tin can her mama used. She was soft-spoken till you gave her reason not to be, and then you'd have done better arguing with thunder. She used to say, "Elias, pride's like salt. A pinch makes the stew, but too much'll ruin supper." Took me years to taste the sense in that. Most mornings I hitched our mule, Amos, God rest that cantankerous beast, and went to the south field. Amos had opinions about everything, and none of 'em matched mine. I'd tug the reins, he'd plant his feet. I'd coax, he'd sigh like a preacher's sermon was dragging too long. Still, we got the furrows laid somehow, me talking and him pretending not to listen. At noon, I'd eat whatever Mama wrapped into flour sack, usually cold pone bread, a slice of salt pork, maybe a green onion if the garden was feeling generous. I'd sit under the persimmon tree, watch buzzards tilt lazy circles overhead, and wonder if life was supposed to be anything other than rows and seasons repeating. But that year the air felt different, like the valley itself was waiting on something to happen. You could feel it in the wind that came down off Miller's Ridge, restless, full of promise it didn't care to explain. Word came round about the Grangers holding a dance to celebrate their new barn. They'd finished raising it in record time, with half the men in the hollow lending shoulders. A dance meant fiddles, pies, gossip, maybe a fist fight if somebody's mouth ran ahead of their manners. For me, it mostly meant excuses. I'd never danced proper, and the thought of trying in front of folks set my stomach to turning. Silas Boone, the blacksmith, was the first to poke fun at me over it. He leaned in his doorway one morning, hammer in hand, sparks jumping behind him like fireflies in a jar. "Evening dance this Saturday, Eli. You coming, or you planning to court that mule of yours instead?" I told him, "Amos steps on less toes than I do." He laughed, a deep belly sound that rolled across the yard. "Boy, you keep letting fear hit your wagon, you'll never get nowhere worth going." He was right, though I wouldn't admit it then. Come Saturday, the whole valley smelled of excitement and fried chicken. Women baked pies till the air near the schoolhouse was sweet enough to make bees drunk. Men shaved, shined boots, swapped stories about who'd bring the finest cake and who'd spill punch on it first. Even the old dogs caught the fever, trotting behind wagons like they knew the night would be generous with scraps. I told myself I wasn't going. Then I washed my shirt anyway. Told myself I was just keeping it clean. Then I borrowed polish from Silas for tools, though he knew better. By sundown, I'd lost the argument with my own pride and set out down the lane, Amos snorting behind me like he approved for once. The Granger place sat on a knoll where the breeze could catch the smell of every pie and carry it halfway to heaven. Lanterns hung from the rafters inside, their light spilling through slats like liquid gold. You could hear the fiddles clear from the bridge, strings sharp and quick, banjo laughing alongside. Folks clapped in time, boots hitting boards in a rhythm older than the church bell. I near turned back twice before reaching the door. My heart was beating bigger than its own ribs. Inside, the floor was already a-crowdin' with couples, skirts turning, boots thudding, the air thick with sawdust and perfume that tried to hide sweat and didn't quite manage. And then I saw her. Clara May Whitaker. She'd come down from the next ridge, staying with her aunt for harvest. I'd seen her once or twice at the store, her hair the color of wheat before the sun decides whether to set or shine. She wasn't showy, none of that, but there was a stillness around her that made noise behave itself. She was laughing at something Ruth Carter said, head tipped just so, and that laugh, well, it landed somewhere in me I hadn't known was empty till then. I stood there useless, holding my hat like it might explain me. Ruth Carter spotted me fidgeting and marched straight over. "Eli Turner, you look like a man staring at a plate of food he's too shy to eat. Go ask that girl to dance." I don't rightly. "Boy, you've been hoeing straight lines all spring. I reckon you can walk one circle without dying. Move." So I moved, heart hammering, tongue forgetting its job. Clara May turned when I stopped beside her. Up close she smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke, like Sunday trying to meet Saturday halfway. "Would you mind, that is, if you ain't got—" She smiled, small but sure. "I'd be pleased to, Eli Turner." How she knew my name, I'll never guess. Maybe the Hollow talks more than we think. The caller struck up Soldier's Joy, and off we went. My first few steps felt like trying to walk on creek stones, but she moved gentle, patient, letting me find my feet. By the second tune, I was breathing easier. By the third, I'd forgot there were other folks in the room. The lamps blurred to halos, the boards hummed, and all I could think was how her hand fit mine like it had been practiced. We danced till my shirt stuck and my grin hurt. When the music stopped, she thanked me polite, then drifted off toward her kin, leaving me with the taste of apple cider and awe.
Morning broke gentle after that dance, the kind of dawn that don't rush nobody. Mist hung low in the valley like a quilt left out to air, and the dew on the beans shone brighter than silver. Amos was bawling for feed before I even got my boots laced. That mule always figured if the sun was up, it ought to be chewing something. I was sore in places I didn't know a body could be sore. My legs ached from all that dancing, though I hadn't rightly danced so much as survived the attempt. Mama asked why I was whistling at breakfast. I told her I wasn't. She just smiled, that way mamas do when they know more than you told 'em. "Must have been a fine evening," she said, ladling gravy over biscuits. "Wasn't bad," I muttered, which was mountain talk for best night of my life. After eating, I hitched Amos to the cart to haul a sack of meal over to Reverend Pike's place. The road to the parsonage wound along Miller's Creek, ruts deep, shaded by sycamores with roots like old muckles. The wheel hit a hole big as a baptismal font, and before I could cuss proper, the cotter pin snapped clean. Down went the cart, sack half spilled, Amos looking back at me like I'd done it deliberate. I was crouched in the mud trying to wedge the axle up with a stone when a voice behind me said, "That road's been breaking wagons longer'n we been breaking bread." I turned, and there she was, Clara May, wearing a simple blue work dress and a straw hat with the brim gone soft. She had her little brother with her, a freckled feller with a fishing pole longer than good sense. "Morning, Miss Whitaker," I said, tipping my hat and losing what pride I had left in the ditch. She laughed low. "Looks like you got trouble." "Nothing I can't fix," I lied. "Then I reckon you won't mind me helping." She knelt right there in the dust, didn't care a whit for the hem of her dress. We lifted that wheel together, me straining like a fool, her steady as a fence post. The boy handed me a stick he claimed was lucky. I whittled it down with my pocket knife till it fit the hole clean, slid it through, and the cart stood square again. "Well," she said, brushing her hands, "seems luck favors them that don't wait on it." I grinned, mud on my sleeve and heart beating like a hammer. "Reckon I owe you." She tilted her head. "You can pay me with a story sometime." A story. Not money, not thanks, a story. I didn't know then, but that was the first promise between us. We walked together a ways down the road, her brother skipping stones across the creek. She talked easy about her mama's garden, about the bees that kept swarm moving into the smokehouse, and about how her aunt kept chickens mean enough to chase hawks. I mostly listened. Her voice had that sound of cool water over rocks, quick but peaceful. By the time we reached the fork where our paths split, the morning had slipped toward noon. The air was heavy with honeysuckle, and cicadas were testing out their songs. We stood there a minute, not knowing how to end it. "Well," I said, "I'll see you at church Sunday, maybe." "Maybe."
Morning broke gentle after that dance, the kind of dawn that don't rush nobody. Mist hung low in the valley like a quilt left out to air, and the dew on the beans shone brighter than silver. Amos was bawling for feed before I even got my boots laced. That mule always figured if the sun was up, it ought to be chewing something. I was sore in places I didn't know a body could be sore. My legs ached from all that dancing, though I hadn't rightly danced so much as survived the attempt. Mama asked why I was whistling at breakfast. I told her I wasn't. She just smiled that way mamas do when they know more than you told them. "Must have been a fine evening," she said, ladling gravy over biscuits. "Wasn't bad," I muttered, which was mountain talk for best night of my life. After eating, I hitched Amos to the cart to haul a sack of meal over to Reverend Pike's place. The road to the parsonage wound along Miller's Creek, ruts deep, shaded by sycamores with roots like old knuckles. The wheel hit a hole big as a baptismal font, and before I could cuss proper, the cotter pin snapped clean. Down went the cart, sack half spilled, Amos looking back at me like I'd done it deliberate. I was crouched in the mud trying to wedge the axle up with a stone when a voice behind me said, "That road's been breaking wagons longer'n we been breaking bread." I turned, and there she was, Clara May, wearing a simple blue work dress and a straw hat with the brim gone soft. She had her little brother with her, a freckled feller with a fishing pole longer'n good sense. "Morning, Miss Whitaker," I said, tipping my hat and losing what pride I had left in the ditch. She laughed low. "Looks like you got trouble." "Nothing I can't fix," I lied. "Then I reckon you won't mind me helping." She knelt right there in the dust, didn't care a whit for the hem of her dress. We lifted that wheel together, me straining like a fool, her steady as a fence post. The boy handed me a stick he claimed was lucky. I whittled it down with my pocket knife till it fit the hole clean, slid it through, and the cart stood square again. "Well," she said, brushing her hands, "seems luck favors them that don't wait on it." I grinned, mud on my sleeve and heart beating like a hammer. "Reckon I owe you." She tilted her head. "You can pay me with a story sometime." A story. Not money, not thanks, a story. I didn't know then, but that was the first promise between us. We walked together a ways down the road, her brother skipping stones across the creek. She talked easy, about her mama's garden, about the bees that kept swarm moving into the smokehouse, about how her aunt kept chickens mean enough to chase hawks. I mostly listened. Her voice had that sound of cool water over rocks, quick but peaceful. By the time we reached the fork where our paths split, the morning had slipped toward noon. The air was heavy with honeysuckle, and cicadas was testing out their songs. We stood there a minute, not knowing how to end it. "Well," I said, "I'll see you at church Sunday, maybe." Maybe, but her smile told me sure. That week stretched slow and bright. Every day felt like waiting on Sunday. I worked double just to make the hours move. Plowing, mending fence, taking firewood down to Silas Boone's forge. Silas teased me near to death. "Boy's got his head in the clouds," he said to no one in particular, pounding an iron shoe. "You courtin' or dreamin'? Because only one of those gets you invited to supper." I told him I wasn't courting. He said, "Not yet." The forge smelled of hot metal and hickory smoke, a scent that'll cling to a man's soul longer'n his shirt. Silas was a philosopher when the hammer slowed. He talked about how heat made iron honest. You find out real quick what's strong and what just looks it. I reckon people aren't much different. That Saturday, Mama sent me to the store for molasses. The store sat right off the wagon road. Boards worn thin by boots, bell over the door that jingled like a guilty conscience. You could buy near anything there. Feed, calico, penny nails, gossip free with purchase. I was checking the shelf when the door opened and that same lavender and wood smoke scent walked in. Clara May carried a basket, traded eggs for flour, and nodded to me polite. We talked about nothing, the heat, the dust, the way the creek was running low already. When she left, I followed her out with a sack over my shoulder and courage in my mouth. "Miss Clara," I called, "you still collecting stories?" "Always." "Well, I got one about a mule named Amos who thinks he's a judge of character." She laughed, real and free like church bells in summer. "Then you best tell it." So I did, walking beside her as the road bent through the pines. Told her how Amos would stop dead if he sensed I was fixin' to lie, how he'd bray at any stranger that looked too proud, and how he'd once eaten a preacher's hat clean through. She laughed so hard she near dropped her basket. By the time we reached her aunt's gate, the sun was sitting low, turning the dust gold. I wished her good evening and walked home lighter than I'd left. That night, I sat on the porch whittling a sliver of cedar into something shapeless, humming the tune they'd played at the barn dance. The world felt smaller in the best way, like it could fit right between my hands if I was careful.
Sunday came hot and still. Church bells rang clear across the valley, their sound catching in the folds of the hills. The congregation filled the little clapboard chapel till the air was half breath, half hymn. Reverend Pike preached on patience, how good things took root slow. I tried not to take it personal. After service, folks gathered under the oak outside. Women fanned themselves with song sheets, men loosened collars and talked crops. I saw Clara May near the well, helping pour lemonade into tin cups. I eased over, trying to look like I wasn't. She handed me one. "Hot day," she said. "Could use rain," I answered. She smiled. "Seems like all we ever talk about's the weather." "Safer topic," I said. "Ain't likely to argue with the sky." That made her laugh again. We stood there a while, not saying much. Sometimes nothing's exactly the right size of something. Before leaving, she said, "Mama's putting up peaches this week. If you're not busy, come help us fetch 'em from the orchard. Might trade another story for your trouble." I nodded slow. "Reckon I can make time?" "Reckon you better," she said, eyes glinting just a bit. The peach orchard sat on a slope above the river, trees heavy with fruit soft enough to bruise if you breathed wrong. The smell hit you first, sweet and sharp, bees thick in the air humming like distant fiddles. We filled baskets till our wrists ached, juice sticking to our fingers. She showed me how her mama packed slices in jars with sugar and clove. I told her how Mama dried apple rings on string come autumn. We talked about everything small that makes up living. How to keep beans from rusting, how to turn buttermilk into biscuits without losing your temper, how to know when a storm meant business. When we were done, we sat under a tree eating the peaches too ripe to can. The juice ran down our chins and neither of us cared. A breeze came off the river, cool and smelling of stone and moss. She leaned her head back, eyes closed, and said, "This here's what heaven probably smells like." I reckon she was right. I wanted to tell her how it felt sitting there, that still, that right. But words got shy on me, so I just said, "Be a shame if it ever changed." She said, "It will. Things always do. That's what makes today matter." She had a way of talking that made simple things sound like scripture. The days turned into a pattern. Chores in the morning, a glimpse of her in the afternoon if luck was kind, sometimes at the store, sometimes walking home with her brother, sometimes just waving from the field as she passed on the wagon road. Each time felt like a small mercy. I started saving pennies for a decent coat, thinking maybe I'd court proper come fall. I worked extra hours at the mill, hauling sacks till my shoulders sang protest. I didn't mind. Sweat's a fine price for hope. One evening, Silas Boone called me over after work. He'd seen the way I'd been smiling to myself. "Elias," he said, "you're building something I can't fix with a hammer. Don't let fear be the only man at the table when you ask for what you want." I carried that thought home like a lantern. That night, lightning bugs rose over the field, hundreds, maybe thousands, winking in unison. I stood at the fence thinking how they didn't fight the dark, just lit a little piece of it. Maybe that's what love was, not chasing the dark off, just giving it something gentle to hold. Come August, the air got so thick you could near spread it on biscuits. Cicadas screamed their fool heads off from dawn to dark, and the hills just sat there, holding the heat like a grudge. The corn leaves turned brittle, shaken dry in the wind. It was a season that tested everything: crops, tempers, and patience. Work slowed some on the Turner patch, and I took to helping Silas Boone in the forge. He said I had a good swing with a hammer, though truth was, I just liked the way fire talked. It had moods, that flame, hissing one minute, humming the next,
like it knew secrets about the world and was thinking whether to share. We'd start early, him pumping the bellows, me holding tongs steady while sparks leapt up like angry stars. The anvil rang clear through the valley, a sound that said, "Men are working here," and the town trusted that music more'n any clock. At midday, Silas would lean his weight on the bench and wipe his brow with a rag that hadn't been white since the war between the states. He'd pull out cold biscuits from his wife's tin and hand me one. "Boy," he said one day, chewing slow, "you keep company with that Whitaker girl?" Well, sometimes I help fetch for her family." "Uh-huh," he said, grinning. "Ain't fetched so much in your life till now. Best make sure you're fetching what's worth keeping." "I reckon I am." Silas nodded, thoughtful. "Then you treat her gentle, but you speak your mind. A woman worth loving don't need guesswork. Tell her what you mean, and mean what you say." That stayed with me longer than most sermons I ever heard. Around that time, the Whitakers took on cannon work for half the hollow. Peaches, beans, beets, whatever would fit in a jar. Clara May invited me to help haul firewood and stoke the boiling pots. I didn't mind a bit. The smell of scalded fruit and hot sugar was enough to make a man forget his aches. Women moved about that yard like a well-rehearsed choir, some stirring, some sealing, some fussing over lids that wouldn't take. They laughed near as much as they worked. I'd never known such sound to feel holy. It was the hum of people surviving together, not grand, not loud, just steady. That's the sound you come to miss later when the world grows too quiet. When the sun dropped, she brought me a jar still warm, the light catching the syrup so it looked like bottled sunset. She said, "For your mama." I nodded. "She'll say thank you kindly." She said, "And what will you say?" I said, "I'll say it twice." She smiled. "That's a fair start." Come early September, word ran that the mine up on Red Hollow Ridge needed hands. Coal paid better than farming, and with the dry spell hitting the crops, half the men in town went to sign their names. I'd never been underground longer than a root cellar, but the promise of steady wages called to me. I figured a few months might set by enough for that new coat I'd been dreaming on, maybe even a proper gift for Clara May come winter. Mama fretted, of course. "Elias, that mountain don't like being disturbed. Ain't natural, men digging where roots can't grow." "I'll be careful," I told her, which is a fool's comfort, but all I had. Silas fixed me a lamp and wished me Godspeed. He said, "Keep your ear to the earth. She'll tell you when she's mad." The first time I went in, the dark swallowed sound. The air smelled of stone and old damp. Not rot, just age. We worked by lamplight that shook when we moved, shadows dancing like restless souls on the walls. Picks rang out steady, boots scuffed. Someone coughed till his lungs near quit. But after a while, you stop minding the dark. It just becomes another kind of day. There's a rhythm to a mine, same as plowing or hammering. You learn to breathe with the swing of your arm, to measure danger by the tremor underfoot. The men down there weren't much for talking. What words we had went towards songs, low, half-sung prayers that kept fear company. After a week or two, the work got easier, or maybe I just quit expecting comfort. The pay was real, heavier than I'd ever earned. I sent some home to Mama, saved the rest in a jar under my cot. Every coin sounded like a promise when it hit the glass.
One morning in late September, the air changed. Don't know how else to say it. it got thick and wrong, like the mountain was holding its breath. Saw Whitaker, Clara May's cousin, stopped his pick mid-swing and said, "Y'all feel that?" Then the timbers creaked, low and mean. Somebody shouted, lamps wavered, and the earth grumbled deep down. We ran. Dust poured like river water, filling our mouths, our eyes, our fear. The roof dropped behind us with a sigh that could have been the end of a prayer. By the time we stumbled out into daylight, the mountain was quiet again, too quiet. No one was lost, thank the Lord. A small mercy, but one that fills your chest till you can't breathe for gratitude. I remember sitting there on the grass outside the mine, hands shaking, lungs begging for air that didn't taste a rock. The sky looked too blue, too wide. I swore I'd never take it for granted again. That evening after wash-up, I walked down to the creek where the road turns soft near the bend. Clara May was there, barefoot, skirt hiked to the ankles, skipping stones with that little brother of hers. When she saw me, her smile faltered. "You heard about the cave-in," I said. She nodded. "I did. Auntie said all hands made it out, but I needed to see for myself." "Well," I said, my throat dry, "here I am." She stepped closer, her face searching mine like she could read what words didn't say. "You're sure you're all right?" "I am now." That was the first time I held her hand without thinking twice. Her palm was rough from work, warm from sun. I could feel the pulse in it, small but sure, same beat as mine. We didn't speak for a long while. The creek filled the silence, soft and steady. When we finally turned to go, she said, "I prayed for you, Elias, not fancy, just plain." "Reckon plain prayers reach heaven fastest," I said. She squeezed my hand once and let go. After that day, everything felt sharper. Colors, sounds, the way wind moved through the grass. The simple act of breathing felt like a gift wrapped in grace. Work didn't seem like burden no more. It was proof I was still here. I kept seeing Clara May when I could, helping her family cut wood, carrying flour from the store, walking her home from church, even if home was the long way around. We talked about nothing and everything. Her dreams of keeping a place with a porch wide enough for rocking chairs, my hopes of owning a mule that didn't have opinions. Small talk, maybe, but it built something steady between us. One evening, the air cool and sweet with the promise of fall, she brought out a tin box from her porch. Inside were pressed flowers, ticket stubs from county fairs, and a folded scrap of paper. She handed me that paper shyly. It was a poem, her own hand, words about the Reg and the river, about a girl waiting for someone who worked too hard to notice the world blooming around him. It weren't fancy, but it was truer than most things I'd ever read. I told her so. She blushed, said, "Well, you notice it now, don't you?" "I surely do," I said. That poem still folded in my Bible, yellowed and thin as memory. The season turned slow. Pumpkins fattened, leaves flamed and fell. Nights got crisp enough for a blanket. The mine hired fewer men as winter neared, so I went back to the farm, helping Mama put up stores for the cold months. Clara May and I spent more Sundays walking the ridge trail, talking about what a home ought to be. She wanted chickens, I wanted peace. We reckoned both could fit under the same roof. The night before the first frost, I told her I'd saved enough for a proper coat and maybe a ring if I was smart with what was left. She looked at me sideways, smiling just a little. "Well, I reckon you best not waste either," she said. That winter come on quick, like a bill collector you hoped forgot your address. Frost crept up the window panes most mornings, drawing little rivers of white lace Mama said were angels practicing for spring. The stove worked near to death trying to keep up, and the smell of hickory smoke settled in every stitch of our coats. You could tell who was burning what by the scent following them down the road. Pine for the poor, oak for the lucky, coal for the ones who'd traded lungs for wages. The mine slowed to half cruise once the deep cold set in. I took to odd jobs, fixing fences, cutting firewood, helping Silas shoe horses too ornery for his back to wrestle. Each dollar I tucked away like a secret between me and hope. By Christmas, I had enough for that new coat and a plain gold ring. Silas helped me pick it. "You want something that'll last longer than foolishness," he said, sorting through a box of old stock the traveling peddler left behind. We found one simple and honest, no stones, just the right weight of promise. I held it in my palm and felt my hands sweat like they knew they were signing a lifetime. Snow fell thick that January. The world went quiet, the kind of quiet you don't get now that engines and radios stole it. I waited for a clear day, then walked to the creek bend where we'd stood after the mine scare, the place where my heart had finally quit running from itself. The water was half frozen, slow and clear as glass. A redbird flashed through the cedars like it was carrying a secret, too. Clara May came up the path, breath puffing in little clouds, cheeks pink from the cold. She had that same blue ribbon in her hair, worn now, but I swear it still caught the light like new. She smiled when she saw me. "You look like you're fixing to say something," she said. "I reckon I am," I answered. I told her I didn't have much. A patch of land that still owed me more than I owned it, one mule with opinions, a roof that leaked in two corners and whistled in the wind. But I told her I had every intention of building something steady with her, something that could outlast the weather. She listened quiet, eyes shining like the creek in sunlight. I took that ring out, hands shaking worse than a poplar leaf. I said, "I can't promise riches, but I can promise honest work, a warm fire, and to be the same man come Wednesday as I am come Sunday." She looked at me long before speaking. Then she said, "Soft as snowfall. That's more'n most folks ever offer." And just like that, she said yes.
We married come spring, under the oak behind Reverend Pike's church. The whole holla turned out. Folks love a wedding near as much as they love biscuits. The women brought pies, the men brought laughter, and Ruth Carter cried louder than anybody, though she swore it was just her eyes acting up. Silas gave me a small horseshoe charm for luck, though I told him Clara May was plenty of that already. She wore a simple white dress her mama'd stitched for muslin, and when she walked down that aisle, every songbird in the valley might as well have stopped to listen. I ain't ashamed to say my knees near gave out. After the vows, Reverend Pike said, "Now go make a life worth remembering," which is the finest blessing a preacher ever gave. We set up house in a 2-room cabin near the mill road. The walls leaned a little, the stove smoked if you looked at it wrong, and the floor squeaked like it wanted to join the conversation. But it was ours. We scrubbed it, patched it, prayed over it till it held together like a promise. Nights we'd sit by the lamp, her mending, me whittling, both too tired to talk much, but too content to care. She filled that place with warmth you couldn't buy. Curtains she dyed with pokeberry juice, shelves lined with jars that caught sunlight like jewels, the smell of biscuits and sorghum every Sunday morning. I'd wake to her humming hymns soft and low, and I'd think, if heaven's got music, it sounds just like that. Life weren't perfect, but it was real. That's better. We had lean years, crops that gave up too soon, winters that hung on too long, nights when the wind howled through the cracks like it wanted in. but we weathered 'em side by side. She taught me how to stretch a pot of beans into 3 meals and how to laugh even when the stew was thin. She never once complained about the hard times, just said, "The Lord made plenty of good days coming. He's just resting some." When we lost our first baby, she sat quiet by the fire for 3 nights straight, eyes on the flame but seeing something far away. I didn't know what to do, so I sat beside her, our hands touching just enough to say what words couldn't. On the 4th morning, she stood, wiped her face, and said, "We still got work to do." That's the kind of strength that humbles a man. A year later, our daughter came along, tiny thing with lungs strong enough to wake the mountains. We named her Ruthie, after the woman who made me dance when I thought I couldn't. Clara May said that was fitting, since both had a knack for pulling me out of my own fool head. I remember the first night Ruthie slept through till dawn. Clara May and me just lay there listening to the quiet, hands clasped in the dark. She whispered, "Hear that?" And I said, "Ain't nothing to hear." She smiled, "Exactly. Peace sounds a lot like nothing once you've earned it." Years rolled steady. We planted gardens, raised chickens, buried old pets, and argued over whether to paint the porch rail white or leave it honest wood. Every summer brought the harvest dance at the Granger barn, and we went every time. I never once stepped on her toes again, though she teased that she missed the excuse. When the first Model T came sputtering through Briar Hollow, we stood out front watching it like it was sorcery. She said, "Imagine riding that to Knoxville." I said, "Imagine walking if it breaks halfway." She laughed till tears came, and I knew we'd always find our joy where it was cheapest and best. She had her ways of keeping life from getting too heavy. If I came home grumbling about taxes or weather, she'd hand me a biscuit and say, "Complain with your mouth full, it'll soften the words." If she burned supper, she'd shrug and say, "Well, now it's smoking good." The woman could turn trouble into laughter faster than most folks turn cream to butter. I lost her one autumn morning, many years later, when the leaves were burning up the hills in color. She went quiet, same as she'd lived. No fuss, no crying, just laid her hand in mine and whispered, "Don't forget to check the weather in your memory." Then she was gone. The house felt too big after that. I'd catch myself talking out loud, asking her where she kept the sugar or what she thought about the new preacher, and the silence would answer gentle but firm. I kept her things just so. The ribbon in her Bible, the tin box with that poem, the jar of peaches we'd put up the year Ruthie married and moved away. Some nights I'd open it just to see the syrup catch the lamplight, still gold, still sweet. Funny how love don't spoil easy. I sit here now, an old man with more past than future, and folks ask me how I met your grandmother. They expect one moment, a dance, a word, a smile, but the truth is, I've been meeting her my whole life. Each season brought a new part of her I hadn't known I loved yet. Meeting's what love does when it refuses to end. If you take anything from an old man's rambling, take this. Don't wait for perfect days. The best ones hide inside the ordinary, in the way biscuits rise, in the smell of rain hitting dust, in the quiet hand that steadies yours. Love ain't thunder, it's the hum of bees and clover, steady and sure. So that's the long and short of it, though I never was much good at the short. I met your grandmother in a barn full of music, in a broken wheel by a muddy road, in a jar of peaches, in a life built one honest day at a time. And if I've done anything right since then, it's because she taught me how. Thanks for stopping by, friend. Hope you enjoyed the story. Come on back for more old-time yarns anytime.